Welcome to the Investor Empowerment Series radio show, empowering your real estate investing with techniques, opportunities, and information, minus the BS and sales pitches. Now, please welcome the host of the Investor Empowerment Series, Joe Mueller, from the Tough as Nails Investment Syndicate. Joe Mueller.
Welcome back to the Investor Empowerment Series radio show, episode number 30. Today's very special guest is Mark Ferguson. Mark is an active investor as well as a real estate broker out of Colorado. Mark has built a solid rental portfolio. He's flipped over 120 houses on his own, and he's sold over 1,000 houses as a real estate broker. He currently owns about 16 rentals and also has another 16 flips that he's in the middle of that we're going to talk about today. I mean, geez, how do you manage 16 flips going on at the same time? That's just insanity. Mark and I have a very similar background, both getting started in the REO niche back before and or during the real estate crash of 2007 and 8. And it's a great interview about how someone can start from the beginning and end up with a solid portfolio and a successful financial plan for their future. You got to hear what he's talking about. He's got some pretty crazy goals to get to 100 rental properties. This is a great episode. I'm excited for you guys to hear it. All right, let's get started.
Please take a moment to hear from our featured sponsors.
So I just want to take a quick minute to identify one of the new partnerships that we've recently developed in the last month or so, and that's with a company called Lending Home. Lending Home offers 12-month fix and flip type loans with rates as low as 7.5%. I personally went through their lending process in order to vet them out before I would offer it to you guys, and I was thoroughly impressed. That said, I also negotiated special discounts for anybody that comes to them through my network. So if you're interested or you're in need of any funding for your next fix and flip project, and you'd like to see if we can get you rates as low as 7.5%, please contact us at www.tanisfunding.com. That's www.tanisfunding.com.
Thank you for considering our featured sponsors.
Mark, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm so excited to hear your story. Can we get started with a few questions about how you got started in real estate?
Yeah, of course, Joe. Thank you for having me on the show. Happy to talk about whatever you'd like.
Awesome.
And from the very beginning, I grew up in a real estate family. My dad was an agent who became licensed in 78, which was right before I was born. I never wanted a thing to do with real estate because I was sleeping under his desk in the office, and I just, wanted to gravitate away from that and do my own thing. Got a degree in finance in college, couldn't find a job, and I got sucked back into the real estate business, kind of working part-time for my dad, and it kind of all ballooned from there.
All right. So what was the next step that kind of led you to where you're at?
I was kind of an agent. I got my license, but then my dad also flipped houses once in a while. So I was an okay agent, but I wasn't great at calling people. I wasn't super outgoing, and that doesn't mix very well with being a real estate agent, but I really liked the flipping houses side of it. So I'd help him flip houses, buy more houses. I even started fixing them up a little bit myself, which wasn't the smartest thing in the world, but it seemed like it at the time.
Right.
And eventually I kind of found my own niche in the REO world, listing foreclosures, and that's where I really kind of excelled as an agent.
Absolutely. No, that's awesome. We have a very similar background. I don't know if the audience knows that or not, but they're going to find out about it because similar in the fact that I was interested in flipping as well and then got into the REO side as a result. Seems like they go kind of together when you have that investment or maybe like that analytical mindset, looking at numbers and sales and how you can build a business based off of investing as opposed to just brokering retail. So yeah, let's talk more about how that worked for you when you got started in REO and how it led to where you're at today on the fix and flip business you have and the rent and hold business you have.
Yeah, like I said, I wasn't really outgoing. I've always kind of been an introvert, pretty shy when I was a kid, and that didn't help me out as an agent. But I knew, it all kind of started, I decided to fix a house up myself, from the ground up. It needed windows, kitchen, doors, paint, flooring, bathroom. I took out a wall, and I thought I would save money by doing all this manual labor, and it took me 6 months. It was the most miserable time of my life. And because of that, I made like $28,000 that year because I wasn't looking for other properties. I wasn't selling houses as an agent. It was kind of like, not like rock bottom, because obviously there's people have been in a lot worse places than that, but it made me think I've got to change what I'm doing. So from that point forth, I kind of looked at my career and what I was doing, and I knew I had to change things. And randomly, some company sent me a BPO request through fax, which, this is like 2006 or 7. So we had email, but I got the fax. I didn't know what a BPO was. I researched it, called the company, performed this, broker price opinion where you give a value to a bank for a foreclosure. And that just kind of piqued my interest. And all of a sudden, I was calling banks, cold calling them, asking them how to get listings, online, researching as much as I could, trying to figure out this REO world. And it resonated with me right away because you weren't dealing with a bunch of different sellers and buyers and emotions. It was kind of a systems business. Most of it was done online through email, and I really liked the model. So I ended up going full bore for it, got a bunch of BPOs my first year, got a couple listings, ended up joining a national REO organization, went to conferences, and I just put everything into it. I actually stopped, focusing on the flipping or anything else for a while. And I think in 3-4 years later, I was selling over 100 homes a year as an REO agent. It was awesome. I knew what my calling was as a real estate agent at that time.
Wow. So similar to the way that I started in the business, but that's awesome. Before we get too far into that stuff, we haven't touched on where you're based out of.
I am in Greeley, Colorado, which is about 50 miles north of Denver. We're on the plains, just 15 miles east of the mountains. And for people who don't know, one of the highest appreciating markets in the country. It's crazy here. Our median price in 2011 or 12 was about $110,000, and now we're at $260,000.
Wow.
So, yeah, things have gone crazy.
That's amazing. That's one of the questions I was going to ask for you, is what you're seeing in the market right now out in Colorado, because even, nationally, it's like there's a lot of media attention to that Denver market, which obviously spills over to some of the sub-markets, which it sounds like what you're working in, right? So yes. That's awesome. That leads me to the next question. So with that type of appreciation going on over the last 5-6 years, how has that benefited your flipping business? I want to hear all about that.
It's tricky because I started flipping with my dad in 2001. So we kind of went through a little boom. There wasn't a huge boom in Colorado in the early 2000s like Vegas or Arizona where prices were doubling, but we had a boost. And then we went through the downturn where our county led the nation in foreclosures in 2006 and 7. Mm-hmm. And so we saw price decreases and we saw price increases. And I've been flipping through all of those markets. And the thing that changes, like you said, are, prices going up or prices going down. But I've always kind of stuck to the same idea of just buying houses based on what they're worth right now, with enough profit margin where I know if I run into problems, which almost always happens on a flip, whether it's repairs or timeline or something else or the market, I'm going to have enough money to be okay. And so it's nice to see prices going up right now. It's increased my average profit margin, but I haven't changed what price I'm buying at, assuming prices will keep going up. I think that's how people get into a lot of trouble.
Sure. No, that's a great strategy. Absolutely. So you mentioned some problems with your flips. Let's dive into that a little bit more on what's somebody that's just getting started into flipping, some of the expectations they should set in advance when it comes to budgeting or timelines, like you mentioned.
It's always going to take longer, and it's always going to cost more than you think. I mean, even with me, I think I've done 120 flips or something, and every single property, I'm like, oh my God, why is this taking so long? How do we go over budget again? And I even budget to go over budget, and you still go. But right. I think a lot of people watch the HGTVs and the television shows, and the biggest problem most people have just starting out is they don't figure all the costs. You're going to have repair costs, obviously, but besides that, you're going to have closing costs on the front end and the back end. If you're not a real estate agent, you're going to have to pay real estate agents to sell it for you. You have to pay for title insurance, closing fees. If you want to get an inspection, if you need to get a loan and get an appraisal, I mean, the closing costs can be 3% of the loan on the front side. Going to the back side, it can be 10% of the selling price when you're paying agents and if the buyers want closing costs. So you have to figure the closing costs and the carrying costs. Almost nobody figures on TV, and that's insurance, taxes, maintenance. You have to mow the lawn. You have to shovel snow when you own it. And utilities. You have to pay for gas, electric, water while you own that property. So when you go over time, because it never goes as fast as you want, all those carrying costs increase, and that increases your costs more. And then, of course, the budget for repairs, you can only see so much when you're looking at a house for the first time. You don't really see all the repairs, everything that's wrong, until the rehab starts. So there's almost always, wiring, plumbing, something's going to come up that you couldn't see, and that's going to add to the budget.
Great points that you brought up. I think one thing you mentioned about that 10% closing cost on the sell side is a number that nobody seems to give much consideration to when they're working as working on a rehab until they've got, a handful of them under their belt and they realize that, their bottom line check is significantly less than they expected. So that's a great learning point for the listeners. If you're evaluating a property and you're looking at your after repaired value and your costs and your final profit, your net profit, always build in at least 10% on that closing cost side, which is going to include your commissions and the title fees and all this, the closing fees that go into the sell side when you're actually finished with that rehab. I have a question for you based on your experience. You said you've done 120 flips now?
Around there. I don't have an exact number, but it's close to that.
Yeah, that's an amazing number. I mean, that's awesome. Do you have a specific formula or any type of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a quick reference when you walk into a property to get like an average baseline of what your repair costs are going to be? And when I say that, I mean, we hear a lot of people on the podcast as well as through like networking and whatnot that are saying like $30 to $40 per square foot on an interior rehab, not including the exterior aspects or windows or gutters or anything like that. But do you have any type of number like that you use as just a generality to figure that out?
I've never really used those kind of rules. I've always kind of looked at it from a cost breakdown on each repair because every house is so different.
Sure.
I think you get into trouble when you try and get too general and broad based. I mean, when I go into a house, I'll look at, okay, we need flooring. At this point in my career, I know flooring is going to be $4,000. We've got to do interior paint. That's $2,000. We've got to replace the kitchen. I can do a kitchen for $6,000 or $7,000. We can do the bath for $1,500.
Mm-hmm.
Windows need done. So there's 10 windows, $300 a window. That's $3,000.
Sure.
The roof needs done. That's probably $6,000. And I'll list out all the repairs. Tally them all up. Add probably, I'm thinking 20% extra for things I don't know about or the little things. And that's kind of where I get my rehab number. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes, very, very rarely it's lower, but usually it's a little higher. But that's kind of, I don't like the broad rules. I think they can get you in trouble. Speaking of one broad rule I do like is a 70% rule, which kind of goes back to your last question of how much you should buy a flip for. And the 70% rule I think is pretty good as far as figuring out how much you should actually pay for a flip. And that is basically, the ARV after repaired value times 70, and then you subtract the repair number from that. And that works pretty well for most people. But it's, it's tough to buy properties that cheap.
Let's talk about that a little bit more because I don't know if we've ever brought that up before. But so you take the ARV, the after repaired value, you multiply it times 0.7, which is 70%, and that's going to give you whatever number that happens to be, and then you minus what you believe your repair cost to be off of that number. And what does that give you? That gives you your acquisition price, right?
Yep. So if the house is you think the house is going to be worth $200,000 after you fix it up, then you multiply it by 0.7, so that's $140,000. Mm-hmm. And then you subtract, if it needs $20,000 in repairs, then you subtract that from 140, and you should buy it for $120,000.
Right, I do like that rule as well. I know on the wholesale side, because we do some wholesaling as well, we use that number fairly consistently to try to determine what we should be getting it for in order to sell it to the next guy who's going to end up rehabbing and flipping that property. So that's a great piece of information.
I'll pay a little more than the 70% rule, but that's because I'm an agent. So I can save money when I buy it on a commission, and I can save money when I sell it. So, but for people who aren't agents, that 70% works really well.
Awesome. Where are you sourcing your properties nowadays?
I have 16 flips going right now.
Awesome. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's a little crazy. And I would say, 10 or 11 of them are from the MLS. So just getting deals straight off the MLS. 3 of them are from wholesalers who I found. And then a couple others are from auctions. So one a trustee auction, another one it was a Hubzu auction, I believe.
So online auction as well as with trustee, you mean like bank-owned foreclosed auction, right? Where you're going to courthouse steps?
Yep, and I bought one a couple months ago from there. That's the first time I bought a house from the foreclosure auction in 2.5 years. Okay. Because the competition's so crazy, but randomly I went one day and nobody else was bidding and I got one. So
Absolutely. No, that's awesome. So you brought up 10 to 11 of those properties came from the MLS. I know there's kind of a myth out there that the MLS is not a good source of properties, at least where I'm from in Chicago. A lot of investors shy away from those opportunities because they think there's going to be too much competition or they're not going to be able to get the property without overpaying for it significantly. Tell me about those properties. I mean, what types of sales were they? Were they REO? Were they estate sales? I mean, just maybe we'll get the listener a little more intrigued by the fact that these opportunities are out there.
Yeah, a couple of them were REO, but actually maybe only one right now. Mm-hmm. But there's almost no REO in Colorado because our market's so strong. Sure. It's pretty much eaten up all the REO. There's still some opportunity there. And with the REOs, I think a lot of people focus their search just on REO or HUD homes. Mm-hmm. But it's tough to buy REOs cheap enough to flip because the banks know, what they're worth now. They'll list them higher. And really the opportunities with aged properties, I think. REOs that have major repair problems, normal buyers can't get a loan on them, and maybe they're for sale for a couple months, and the banks will negotiate more. So I think the one I bought now was listed for like $160,000. They kept lowered it 3 times, and I ended up getting it for $130,000. But, there's very few REOs like that. Mm-hmm. As far as most of mine, a lot of them are estate sales, like you said. Okay. They're listed on the MLS. They're a mess. They're dirty. They're never cleaned up. And either I get in there right away really fast, or the sellers like my offers because I'm, quick close, no inspection, no appraisal, no contingencies when I do most of my offers. And then I've also built up a reputation that when I make an offer, I'm going to close on it. I don't play games with inspections. I don't back out of contracts. I actually had an agent bring me a deal a couple months ago before he listed it, just saying, hey, are you interested in this house? The sellers want out fast. They don't want to deal with other agents. I'm like, yeah, sure. What's the price? He's like, $85,000. I'm like, deal. We closed it a couple weeks later. And, that wasn't the easiest one I've done for a while. But, it's a mix of estate sales that are just listed. Some of the properties have been on the market for 60, 90 days. And then I'll start to make low offers on those. But I'm not out there making 100 offers a week on every single property. Sure. I'm very specific on what properties I offer on. Maybe I'll make a couple offers a week on age listings on houses that tell me, in the MLS comments, needs TLC, quick close. House is dirty. Like, who can't clean their house? So that tells me they're have some problems. Right. And one other trick that's really helped me out too is fast price changes. So if someone lists a house for $110,000 and then 6 days later they're lowering it to $100,000. That tells me right away they want it sold, and I can make a low offer on that house, and I might be able to work something out.
Good information. So how are you funding these acquisitions on your initial purchase side?
It's a mix. So I have a really good relationship with a local bank here. They've financed just about all of my rental properties, and they finance most of my flips. It takes money from myself. They're not funding 100% of them, but Sure. What they'll do is 80% of the purchase price. They don't do any of the repairs, but their rate right now is 5.5% and 1 point on those loans for a 1-year term.
That's great.
Yeah.
Can't beat that.
Right. And I have another bank I found this last year who's local as well, and I've kind of been, fighting them against each other a little bit. But they were under 5% on the last one I did in 1 point, and they're kind of at 75% purchase price or loan to purchase price. And then I also have 2 different guys who will lend me private money. They're local investors. They're more expensive. They're around 10%, but they'll do 100% of the deal. They'll close it in an hour. They were actually both flippers themselves and kind of turned to lenders, so they know me well. And then I have private money I borrow on an ongoing basis from some family where I just borrow it all year long, pay them an interest rate on that full amount. They know they're going to get their money. I don't pay any points on that. It's a little lower interest rate. And then, of course, I have a lot of my own money invested into them as well for the repairs, for down payments, carrying costs. When you're handling that many properties, it gets pretty expensive.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask that question. I mean, you got 16 projects going on at once. I mean, that's got to be quite a accounting situation you got dealing with over there to make sure everything's done right and all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted.
Yes, and I have someone who handles that I hate accounting, so that is not my specialty.
Takes a special person.
Yes.
So we touched on the financing end of it through these banks. When you're writing up your offers, are you writing them up as a cash transaction with no financing contingency then?
Yes.
Or how does that? Okay, so because I know we have that as well in Chicago. They just changed they call it the multi-board 6.1 contract, but a bunch of legal people got together and wrote up all of our real estate contracts, and that's what the general paperwork that's supposed to be used on an MLS transaction. And there is a new clause that they just put in last year that it's called mortgage financing or financing available non-contingent, and that's like that whole. Well, we're offering like cash, but we could close it with a loan. Have you gotten any pushback from any of the sellers on that, or no?
I got pushback from an REO one time, but
Sure.
We listed as cash, ended up getting a loan on it. REO company's like, nope, you can't get a loan. This says cash deal. And we're like, well, it doesn't affect you at all. There's no contingencies. We're still paying the same amount. Like, nope. So we did an amend extend, got it fixed. But from that point forward, we don't have a clause like that in our contract. But what we do is we add a clause to additional provisions, which just says the buyer is paying cash. However, they may use a portfolio loan to close this deal. It will not affect the seller at all. And if for some reason the loan does not go through, this buyer still has cash to close the deal.
Cool.
And we've never had a problem with that since we've had that clause. It's worked out fantastic doing it that way. And there is with my lenders, there's no appraisal on most of the deals I do. It has to be over $150,000 loan for them to require an appraisal. So that hasn't been an issue.
Not even a BPO, no drive-by or anything?
Nope.
That's over building relationships over time, right? That they're going to allow something like that.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So I think you just touched on a minute ago about your rental portfolio, and I definitely want to hear more about that. I know you've got some goals you've set over time. I love the fact that you're posting your annual goals on your blog and you're kind of reviewing them at the end of the year to show the real world what it's like and how close you got or didn't get to those goals. So let's talk about what your plan is for the future and how rental properties are going to be a part of that.
Yeah, I kind of started the blog a few years ago based on rental properties, how I bought them, financed them, and then along with that, I created a goal to buy 100 properties kind of in the next 9 or 10 years. And I am way behind on that goal. I was doing pretty well the first few years, but I bought my first rental in 2010, right at the end of the year when our market was down. I bought 16 properties the next 4.5 years. So I had 16 rentals. I really focused on cash flow, getting awesome deals on them. And then our market, it had been going up, but then it just went crazy and the cash flow disappeared. Even when you're getting really good deals, just prices were so high that the rents were not keeping up with prices, and it didn't make sense for me to buy properties anymore. So the last rental I bought was September of 2015. I actually sold a couple last year that were not performing well. One had a really weird dining room. We couldn't rent it well. Another one was a college rental, which didn't really meet my criteria for what I was looking for. So I still want to buy properties, and I've looked at buying in Florida, other states, and then I've also kind of looked at buying different types of properties around here, more commercial properties. But the rentals have done awesome. I mean, they make me $7,000 a month now that I sold those two. And then if I look at it after refinancing and selling the two properties, I basically put none of my own money into them. So that's a pretty sweet deal.
So you're following like that BRRRR method that they talk about. You're buying, you're rehabbing, renting, and refinancing. Is that right?
Sort of, but it's more of a longer term thing. So, I mean, when I bought all my rentals, I got an initial loan on them, 80% loan with my portfolio lender. With almost all of them, I did a 30-year amortization with a 5-year ARM where it's, a fixed rate loan for 5 years and it can adjust after that. Mm-hmm. And then I would kind of refinance them a year or two later when I needed the money. So I wasn't really paying cash up front and then refinancing them, in 6 months, which is what the BRRRR method kind of goes after. Mm-hmm. It was more of a longer term, get a loan, get them rented, then maybe a year or two later I would go back and refinance them.
Sure. And I'm hearing a lot about you're talking a lot about working with lenders and refinancing. And can you maybe tell the listener, how does somebody get started in establishing some of these relationships with the right types of banks or financiers of these properties that you're acquiring and flipping and renting?
Yeah, a lot of it's relationship based, like I said, and like you said as well. But one thing that really helps is if you have some experience doing it before. So I remember going to this bank before I had any rentals, and it was a different person I talked to than I work with now, but they kind of gave me the cold shoulder. Like, they wouldn't talk to me very much. I thought they didn't think I was serious. But then when I had a rental, my first rental I got with a regular 30-year fixed mortgage from a big bank. And once I had that one rental, then they're kind of like, oh, well, he's serious. He actually has bought a property. He's an investor. I think they deal with a lot of people who want to be investors but never do it. Mm-hmm. So by actually getting that first property, doing a deal, that really helped me kind of open some doors with them. And, that can be tough because there's that, well, if you can't get financing, how can you do your first deal? You can't do your first deal. How do you get financing?
Right.
But, if you can use a traditional bank for rental property, it's usually not too difficult for your first one, even second one. If you're fixing flipping houses, there's hard money options, private money. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But once you get that property, they wanted me to switch all my accounts to that bank, really do all my banking there. And that's what I did. Moved everything over, talked with them all the time, started giving them all my banking deals. As an agent, I referred buyers to them. So it was kind of a two-way street. They don't want to just give me everything for nothing. The more I help them out, the more they help me out. And it just kind of balloons from there.
Right. No, absolutely. That's awesome. Great points that you brought up. I think that most of the listeners we have are probably more in that getting started type phase, or have a couple rentals or flips under their belt, all the way up to guys that are probably doing maybe 10 to 20 flips a year or multiple rentals. But, the key factor being, bringing some opportunity to, both sides of those relationships, whether it be you getting the funding or, bringing someone to them that can also get funding. And I try to do the same thing on my end out here. It's not as lucrative as the financials that you've kind of presented today, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to keep working at it. So that's great. I guess I'd like to ask about some of the deals more specific, because I really like to kind of expand upon some of these numbers a little bit. So we talked about the $7,000 a month in cash flow. Give me an example of, I know you mentioned some of your purchase and acquisition pricing. Your average rental, what are you bringing in? How does that work? How much work do they need? And what do you see, on an annual basis of the actual return on that rental? And if you got to take a minute to calculate some stuff, that's fine. I just wanted to ask because, I think some of the value of bringing this to the table for the audience is kind of really seeing how those numbers can work.
Right. No, I think I was kind of spoiled a little bit in Colorado's market a few years ago. But, my average purchase price back then was probably $110,000. Mm-hmm. And I was buying houses that were great deals. I could have probably flipped a number of them, but I decided to keep them as rentals. So I would put probably on average $10,000 of repairs into them. And with the rental, you don't have to repair them as nice as a flip. You still have to make them safe and, decent, but you don't have to go all out with everything. The rents were probably around $1,200 to $1,300 I was getting on those properties, maybe a little more. And then one nice thing about Colorado, too, I think you guys can appreciate where you're at, is our property taxes are like 0.5% a year. So on those properties, I might pay $700 a year in taxes on them.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, that just increases your cash flow so much. We had a 1% vacancy rate, so they're almost all rented. They're single-family homes, had almost no evictions, and it worked out about $400 to $500 in cash flow per month on each property. That's after maintenance and vacancy accounting, with a 80% loan on them.
Sure.
And so that's kind of where I came up with that $7,000 in cash flow. And then I think it's 2014, I went through and calculated the exact returns I was getting compared to what I projected. Mm-hmm. And it was almost exactly the same. I was pretty relieved when I saw that. I'm like, wow, I'm not overestimating things by 100% or telling people the wrong information. It was really close, my actual returns, to what I was projecting I was making.
No, that's awesome. That's great. So any advice for an investor who is maybe looking to emulate that type of a model and, get started into buy and hold investing or even the fix and flip investing side? I know we've kind of bounced around that, but what do you think you can offer to somebody as a piece of advice who just wants to maybe start building a portfolio?
I think for either one of those, you have to know your market as well as you possibly can. If you're looking to buy and hold rentals, you need to study the rent to value ratio. Does it make sense? Is there enough rent coming in to cover the expenses with property taxes, with insurance? If you want to hire a property manager, you need to make sure there's enough money there to cover everything. And if that can't happen in your market, which there are a lot of markets out there right now where it's tough, maybe you look at a different market, maybe you look at a different type of property, maybe multifamily is better, maybe even commercial. I've started looking at commercial properties. Actually, I have one under contract right now, which is completely, out of my comfort zone.
Sure.
But, and then, once you figure out that, okay, maybe it's a viable market, then you learn your market, you learn values, you learn rents, you drive neighborhoods, and you figure out, exactly where you want to find your rental. Because, price points to rents can change greatly in neighborhoods. One neighborhood, maybe houses are selling for $150,000 and they rent for $1,000 a month. Where another neighborhood, they're selling for $150,000, but they rent for $1,500 a month. There's a lot of variations to look at. And of course, getting a great deal, you have to learn how to get a great deal. And that just comes back to knowing your market, knowing what values are, so when you're getting a great deal. Going back to the flip side, it's the same thing. Knowing your numbers is so important. I think you can flip in just about any market. Mm-hmm. I think it's actually easier to flip than to find rentals because you're not looking at that cash flow. You're just looking at profit on one deal.
Sure.
And just knowing the cost, knowing your market are just the most important things you can do.
So what I'm hearing is doing your homework in advance. That's
yes.
Basically what you said. And I love that fact. And I love the fact you brought it to everyone's attention because I think that's something that that stuff gets overlooked as people get kind of bombarded with these, representatives from the media, we'll call it, the guru type educational platforms that are out there. They talk about, driving for dollars and, knowing some neighborhoods and, canvassing neighborhoods with maybe, some type of mailing piece or whatever. But at the end of the day, you can't do any deals. I don't care how much canvassing you do of a neighborhood or a market. But if you don't know what the value of those properties is and should be and can be, you can't make a good educated decision in order to make an investment that's actually going to be profitable, whatever model you're following.
Exactly. And you're going to waste a lot of money and a lot of time.
Right.
If you don't know values. And you see that a lot with wholesalers who are brand new. Like, oh, I got this great deal. And it's like, that's retail value you're trying to sell it for.
Right.
No one's going to buy that. You have to know values.
What's up with this commercial deal you're talking about? So you're venturing out into a new class. Tell me about it.
So it's actually going to be a rental property. It's the first one I bought in a year and a half almost, and it's a 3,000 square foot property, has a 1,200 square foot retail space, 2,000 square foot shop behind it, occupied by a furniture store, repair store right now, and they listed it at $110,000, which was dirt cheap to me. Yeah, I'm like, holy cow! It's not an amazing area, but it's fine. It's not like a war zone or anything.
Sure.
And the guy just needs money. So he's even giving me a semi-trailer so I can rent it back to him for a month for free. Sweet. I've never had a semi-trailer, but
that's cool. That's cool.
And it's probably, I talked to a commercial agent just to make sure I wasn't going, out of my mind and missing something, but he thought it would rent for $2,000 a month probably. I'm like, sweet. So
good numbers.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. And it's not in bad shape either.
No, that's awesome. I love it. And you said that was on the MLS?
Mm-hmm. I made an offer on it the same day, and the guy's like, wow, we weren't expecting an offer that quick. And I'm like, well, that's how I work with. It's weird because I'm looking at some other commercial deals, some really bigger projects, and the commercial world is so different than residential. Everyone takes their time. It's kind of like this long, prolonged process, and it's really hard for me because I'm used to working so fast and getting things in so quickly. Now I've got to have all this patience and wait for people to get me documents, in 2 weeks. I'm like, oh my God, come on guys, let's go.
Let's get this done.
Yeah.
No, I get it. No, that's great. That's awesome that you're digressing into that type of asset class. And it sounds like a great deal. $2,000 a month on a $110,000 acquisition. I don't know the specifics of the numbers, but real quick math tells me it's going to be good.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
That's better than any of my single family rental numbers. But you're going to have more vacancies. It's going to take more work to rent it. There'll be some different intricacies that I'll definitely be learning here soon.
You think you mean you're going to have potential for longer vacancy, right? I mean, you're not going to have more of it. There shouldn't be higher turnover.
Right. Yes, that's what I mean. Like, take longer to rent it.
Sure.
If I do lose a tenant, it takes longer to get your commercial properties rented. But yeah, you should have a longer term tenant, someone who's in the commercial space, unless they go bankrupt or something,
Right.
Hopefully they'll be there a long time.
Absolutely. No, great point. I think I read in one of your blog posts that you had, or you were looking at buying out of the Colorado market at one point and maybe getting into some other markets. Has that come to fruition?
I looked at Florida a lot. I even went to Florida last year and researched some markets, found some great places, but I never bought anything there. I think the whole thing was it takes so much work to learn a market out of your area.
There you go.
And then the flipping business was going so well here. I just kind of took the year off for rentals and put all the money I would have spent on rental properties back into the flips.
Right.
And so that really occupied my time, and it just didn't feel right buying out of state yet. I'm not saying I won't do it later or soon, but things were going so well with the flips and different things going here that I just decided to hold off on that for a little while.
Okay. What's the best deal you've ever experienced, or the best deal you've ever done?
The best deal I ever have done.
I love this question, and I got the wheels turning.
It was a flip I did with my dad, and we bought it at the trustee sale. And it was a country property with 8 acres, a nice brick house, and I think we bought it for $210,000 at the trustee sale. Nobody else bid against us, and we could not figure out why, because we ended up selling it for $390,000.
What?
And yeah, and I think
awesome.
We put maybe $40,000 of work into it.
Wow.
And yeah, we're like, what is going on? That's crazy. So another really good deal I had, which is we bought another country property that was listed on Hubzu. Back at the time, they had a buy it now option. Sometimes I see that once in a while, but pretty rare.
Sure.
And they had it listed way below market. And so it was like $200,000. And every hour I was on that website waiting for the buy it now to come up. And on Saturday morning, like 10 a.m., I saw the buy it now for like $210. And I bought it. And we ended up selling that one for $370. And I think we put like $20,000 of work into it. There's been a couple of those country properties we did really awesome on.
That's great.
Yeah, those are not the typical deals I do.
Sure,
but every once in a while, one of those comes up.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's all about knowing the market and paying attention, right? I mean, you can't just sit on your hands and wait for somebody to throw something in your lap. I mean, you said yourself, you're on this website every hour waiting for the buy it now option to pop up, and you were the first guy there when that opportunity opened the door,
Yep. It's funny, too, because they actually, I won't say it, but they messed up in the closing a little bit, giving us an even higher profit than we should have. But
wow.
That company's not always run really well.
Understood. No, I know what we're talking about. That's cool. Everybody who's been an investor, who's done deals and has experience, and somebody like yourself, there's got to be a time when maybe a deal didn't go so well.
For sure. The one I mentioned already, when I did all the work myself, I made no money on that house. So that was a lot of fun, spending 6 months of my life repairing it and then not making anything.
Right.
So that one was bad. Another one that was kind of out of our control, which was a little crazy. We bought a house at the foreclosure sale. The day before the sale, the previous owners filed a lawsuit against the bank saying they foreclosed wrong. Okay. So it didn't show up on our title work. We didn't see it before we bid. We got to the house. It's like perfect shape, completely vacant, except there's a brand new BMW in the garage. We're like, what the heck is going on? So we found the previous owners, contacted them. They're like, oh, yeah, we're getting the house for free. They foreclosed wrong. We're like, that's not exactly how this works. But anyway, they filed this lawsuit against the bank. And even though it was our house, we couldn't do anything with the house because it had a clouded title for this lawsuit.
Right.
And we even offered them $5,000 to drop the suit, go away. They wouldn't do it.
Wow.
They've been convinced by some paralegal that they're going to get the house for free. And it drug on for a year before the judge heard the case. As soon as he saw it, he threw it out immediately, and we got the house back. But adding on a year of closing costs, we hired our own lawyers to kind of get intervened so we could speed up the process. We lost money on that deal because of all that. And it really was nothing we could do about it. It was just one of those crazy situations. So that one wasn't much fun, but you have those. If you do enough deals, you're going to have some bad ones.
Exactly. And your money was tied up in that? Well, you bought it at the trustee sale, so you got to come up with that cash like then and now, right?
Right. In Colorado, the sales are 10 a.m. every Wednesday morning, and you have until noon to bring the full amount in cash.
Wow.
If you're the winning bidder.
2 hours.
Yep.
They don't leave much room for error there. That's crazy.
No.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So that's something to bring up, though. I mean, for people that are, you hear a lot about the foreclosure auction and the trustee sale courthouse auction. I mean, it's a whole different animal when you're, especially if you're newer to the real estate investing niche. I mean, it's something that I wouldn't recommend people just jump into unless they've really, really researched and maybe talked to some other investors that have dealt with it in the past, because it can bite you in the ass if it's not done right. That's just part of the game, though, I guess. That high risk, high reward.
Yep, and there's a lot, there's no guarantee you're bidding on a first loan. There's a lot of liens that can survive.
Sure.
There's all kinds of things that can happen at the foreclosure sale. So you really have to be careful. And then every state has their own rules, too.
Right.
So, I mean, just every state has a different process and how it works. And it can be very complicated.
Yeah, state specific. You've got some books you've written, right?
Yes, so I have 4 paperback books I've written, a couple more ebooks. And it's really kind of been a passion lately to try and educate as many people as I can by putting these books out.
I love it. So where can the listener get more information about that, or maybe order that? I know you're on Amazon, I'm sure, but where else can they get onto your blog and find out more about Mark Ferguson?
Yeah, so my blog is investformore.com, and that's invest, the number 4 spelled out FOUR, and then MORE.com. And everybody asks me what that means, and I basically, when I started my blog, it was about rentals, and it was the idea of getting more than 4 mortgages, because most big banks will not give you more than 4 loans.
Right.
So that was where my whole idea for the blog started. And I've got a free ebook on the blog for agents or for investors. I think I have over 450 articles now. They're all free on the site. And then I've got the books. I've got a few coaching programs for people who want more in-depth personal coaching with me. And then all my books are on Amazon. My Build a Rental Property Empire book has been a bestseller for a while. It's done really awesome. And I've got a book on fix and flipping, a book on being an agent, a book on, mindset, goal setting. And I have 2 new books coming out this year, too. So that'll be exciting to see those come out.
Cool. Yeah, I bought the Building the Rental Property Empire book, I think off Amazon. I read it. Great job. Loved it. And I actually passed it along to one of the other investors that I'm working with right now. And he actually really enjoyed the book as well. So that kind of sparked some of that communication between us on, hey, because I'm basically the middleman passing along your information to this guy. And I said, you know what? I got to get him on the podcast because, I know we crossed paths in some place or possibly at the IMN conference a couple of months back and didn't realize that we were there. I would have loved to meet up with you. But, just bringing this information out to the public, I think that there's not enough of that opportunity out there where you can get away from some of that $20,000 educational course stuff. Some of those platforms out there, some of them are high as $50,000. When you got a guy like you, that's literally pasting their life onto a blog, you can read so much information about what you've got going on and how you did it. And I mean, I love the website. I actually reference it pretty frequently, and sometimes I just read it for enjoyment. So that's awesome. I got a couple more questions before we wrap it up, Mark. Again, I really appreciate you taking the time out today to be on the show. What book are you currently reading right now? What's on your nightstand or on your desk?
You know what? I am really bad at reading books because I feel like all my free time I'm working on my own books, like editing them or writing them. But there are a couple really good books that I don't even know the name of the one I just read. But I have like 10 lined up that I want to read. I just don't get to. But, for your listeners, Gary Keller, Millionaire Real Estate Investor, is an awesome book.
Right.
Of course, like the Think and Grow Rich stuff. I love books like that are motivational and just get your mind right. Mm-hmm. And I can't think of the one that I want to read. It's actually about a guy who built the skyscrapers in Chicago, I believe, was one of the richest guys in the world and then went bankrupt.
Really?
I think it's called The Richest Man in the World, but I haven't read it yet. But that's what's sitting there waiting for me next.
Cool. So you're kind of like me, where I go play around on Amazon for an hour and end up with 7 books in my cart, and then I get a big shipment in, and they still sit on a desk collecting dust until I get around to it. But
yes.
No, I get it. No, man, that's what happens when you're busy and you're working and making money and investing. I mean, that's it's always good. I try to nowadays set aside at least a small fraction of time in the morning. I found is best for me when the house is quiet and there's nothing else on my brain to read at least a chapter. That's kind of my new thing. And it's helped out a lot. So I know you mentioned the blog, but what's the best way that the listeners can get a hold of you if they're interested in maybe communicating a little bit more?
Like I said, the blog's great. You can also email me. Mark@investformore.com is my email. That goes straight to me. I answer every email personally. So I like talking to people through email. I'm not a big phone guy, but I'm happy to type away as much as I can. And it's the best way to reach me. I give that away in my books. I'm happy to answer questions for people if I can. Just prefer, try and be concise and quick with your questions.
Sure. And
not write me 4 pages. But and I love to talk to people.
So one last question. What's your real quick answer? What's your best piece of advice you can say to an investor in this market just getting started? I mean, what would you recommend that they start doing in order to get their first fix and flip or their first rental property moving under contract?
I think focus is something a lot of investors lack. They want to do wholesale, they want to flip, they want to buy rentals, they're thinking about being an agent. And I think you just need to focus on one thing from the very beginning, whether it's flipping, whether it's buying rentals. If you want to be an agent, focus on that first and really become successful on that side of it. Mm-hmm. And once you've kind of learned that strategy, really mastered your market, then maybe you can go on to other aspects of it. But just focus on one thing. Even if it doesn't work out, learn, about rentals in your market and if it cash flows, if they'll work. I think too many investors get scatterbrained or trying to flip and wholesale and do all these things at once, mm-hmm. and you end up doing nothing because you're kind of mediocre at everything, but not a master of anything.
Exactly. No, that's an awesome point. Anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
I think that's good. I think a lot of people are worried about interest rates right now and housing market and all that. And mm-hmm. really, I don't try and worry too much about that future because I can't predict it. I don't think anybody can. So I just focus on what's going on right now, our prices right now, and make sure that there's enough profit in every deal that if something does go wrong, then I'll still be okay.
Right. You've got a plan B. I love it.
Yep.
No, that's I feel the same way, actually. And I think looking at fix and flips or rentals, I mean, that's what's cool about what you had mentioned earlier in the podcast, which was, how to identify a deal, right? And I know you had said, you kind of changed gears on what your business model looked like as far as building up to that 100 rental portfolio with your end goal being. But a good acquisition is going to mean that you can probably do either or on that type of a deal. So you could fix and flip it. You can turn it into a rental. And I know in my own experience as well, I found that I've rented a property out that I've just finished working on, and then I sit back and I go, man, that would have really been a great flip. So I mean, but you know what that tells me is that I did something right because I had both opportunities to exit out of that that initial purchase, we'll call it. But
yep, for sure.
Cool, man. Again, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate the time. I mean, you guys, you bring a wealth of information to the table. I recommend the listeners check out your blog at investformore.com. And obviously, Mark gave his personal email address, which is mark@investformore.com. Great guy to work with, wealth of information, and highly recommend people check him out further. So thanks again, man.
No, I appreciate it. Great to be on the show.
Thank you.
And yeah, good to talk with you as well.
Great. All right. I'll talk to you soon, Mark. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Investor Empowerment Series radio show. Be sure to tune in next week for another empowering episode. We welcome your feedback, so please rate us on iTunes and Stitcher, and visit us at www.investorempowermentchicago.com or TannisGroupRealty.com.